of Space Exploration at the UK Space Agency, which has designed a number of crucial pieces of scientific equipment for this project. She joins us now from the landing party at the University of Oxford. Sue, big grin from you, I'm sure. So far, so good. Tell us what's going through your mind at the moment.
It's absolutely brilliant. Really relieved it's safely landed. It was exciting as it descended. So I'm now looking forward to the science that we'll get. The instruments have to be deployed.
We've got a bit of an echo there, so I hope we can carry on. Tell us what's on board, the instrumentation that you're so reliant upon.
Well, the instrument built by the UK is a short period seismometer, and this was built by Imperial College and Oxford University with some help from STFC RAL Space. And this is going to measure Mars quakes, which will tell us about the interior of Mars, how thick the crust is, how thick the mantle is, tell us about the core, is it solid, is it liquid, investigations that we just hasn't been possible until now.
What might this technology help with away from Mars, maybe in other space programs or even down here on Earth?
But that's interesting because this is novel technology. They've done an incredible job. They etched the instrument out of silicon. It's only the size of a pound coin. And this means that it can be used in other applications. We're looking at the potential of using it for inertial measurement unit, which measures acceleration. So you could use it if you're down caves for navigation or in buildings where you've lost GPS signal. So firemen could use it when dealing with fires in buildings. Another possibility is using it as a gravitometer. So you'd be measuring the fluctuations in the Earth's gravity.
We shouldn't be surprised that it's actually quite difficult to land things on Mars safely. You've been involved in less successful attempts than this, Sue, I think.
Yes, I was involved in Beagle 2 and also the Schiaparelli failed landing in 2016. So I was really nervous, even though it was a landing technology that's been used before. It is so difficult to land on Mars. The atmosphere changes, so it's always difficult.
And how much can you simulate a mission down here, whereas you say the conditions are so different?
It's very difficult. A lot of it is done by computer modelling. You do some releases in the Earth's atmosphere, but that doesn't really simulate what happens on Mars. It can test your models, so you can be more confident in your models, but it's only really when you're at Mars that we test it.
It's been an obsession for years, this idea that we might actually land a person on Mars, but it takes 6 months to get there, doesn't it? How far away are we from doing that?
Still quite a way. It is our long-term goal. I will be going back to the moon at the end of the next decade, and I think Mars is somewhere from there, because with the key technologies we have to test, we have to know we can ascend from Mars with people. We've got to work out how to keep the astronauts safe in such a harsh radiation environment.
Well, I don't want to go anyway, Sue, so I'm not in a rush. Sue Horn, from the Head of Space Exploration at the UK Space Agency. Enjoy the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Neil Bowles teaches atmospheric physics at the University of Oxford and is part of the UK team working on the mission. He's also at the landing party. Neil, thank you for talking to us. I know that you've got a lot to celebrate, and fingers crossed for the rest of the mission. Tell us just how delicate this equipment is that's on board.
Okay, so seismometers, you normally, seismometers are usually the sort of instruments that you wear, you carry around with kit gloves. They're very delicate. They can be placed in the field very accurately and then buried underground often. So those are the sorts of things that you wouldn't normally associate with basically launching into space on a rocket and then barreling through the atmosphere of another planet and then dropping it onto the surface. So we had to do an awful lot of work to prove that the instrument would survive landing on the surface of Mars. And a lot of very clever design features. The leader of the instruments, a guy called Tom Pike at Imperial College, and he basically had to design into the structure a whole load of very clever designs to enable it to actually survive going into space, going on the way to Mars, then just doing what it's just done, barreling through the atmosphere and then landing on the surface. So we had to do an awful lot of work of testing on the ground, and now we find out whether or not it survived all the way to the surface. That's the next big moment for us.
Yeah, and this thing is only about the size of a pound coin, but you are taking gross liberties with it, of course, as you just explained. So how much are the odds stacked against you on a mission like this?
Well, they're usually actually pretty good, because what we do is we have a rough idea from the previous Mars landings of what's going to happen as it's going into the atmosphere and as it touches onto the surface. So that means we can then design our testing on Earth to simulate those as accurately as possible. So what that then means is that we can then do all the testing on the ground, and then that gives us pretty good confidence that it will survive when it gets into space and then lands on Mars. So we've already tested the instrument on its way to Mars, and we know that certainly most of it is working. There was one part we couldn't test when it was cruising, as we call it, between the Earth and Mars. That's what we expected. Now, when it's sitting on Mars's gravity, then we can test the entire instrument.
Extraordinary. Enjoy this success. Long may it continue. Dr. Neil Bowles from the University of Oxford, thank you very much.
Good, thank you.
The Prime Minister has been trying to sell her Brexit deal to MPs. She told the Commons that she'd secured the best deal possible and that rejecting it would risk more division and would take the country back to square one. She faced criticism from her own party as well as the opposition. MPs will vote on the deal next month. So how many members of Parliament does she need on her side to get the deal through? There are 650 MPs, but only 320 votes are required for a majority in the Commons. Theresa May currently has a working majority of 13, which relies on the support of the 10 Democratic Unionist MPs. But already those DUPs and between 80 and 90 Tory backbenchers have said that they will not support the Prime Minister's deal. The Labour leadership has said it won't back the deal either, but there may be groups of Labour MPs who do get behind the government. The Scottish National Party also say they won't vote for the deal. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, looks at the task ahead for Theresa May and her Brexit withdrawal agreement.
She's in a hurry. After nearly 2 years of talks, Theresa May has 15 days to get Parliament on her side. She has to convince enough of them her Brexit compromise is worth it.
The Prime Minister.
There is a choice which this House will have to make. We can back this deal, deliver on the vote of the referendum, or this House can choose to reject this deal and go back to square one. The British people want us to get on with a deal that honours the referendum and allows us to come together again as a country whichever way we voted.
As you can hear, the trouble for Theresa May, she's surrounded by people who've made their minds up to reject her deal.
This deal does not have the support of either side of this House or the country as a whole. Mr. Speaker, ploughing on is not stoic. It's an act of national self-harm. The Prime Minister now needs to prepare a Plan B.
It's been hard enough getting the Cabinet behind the deal, the compromise that keeps close economic ties to the EU. They're certainly not all as enthusiastic as this.
The thing is that anything could happen if this deal doesn't get through, and that's my concern. That's why I want to back this agreement and urge all my colleagues to do the same.
And in the event that there's a dispute...
There is organised resistance right around Westminster. Meet some of the Eurosceptics vowing to vote against.
This is not the Brexit deal that the majority of the people voted for. I'm not going to support it.
Is there anything the Prime Minister could say to change your mind?
Absolutely not.
This is a 585-page surrender document. And that's why many Conservative MPs will never vote for our country to surrender to anybody.
Unfortunately, she's caved in, and that is a sad note on which to begin this debate. But the debate that's got to be had is going to be uncompromising.
Do you think there's any chance as a group that this will actually go through Parliament?
No, not a hope.
No way.
No.
I think it's highly unlikely.
Round the corner, a different group from different parties who will vote against as well. With some familiar faces, they're arguing for another referendum, releasing independent forecasts that suggest we'll be much poorer if we leave.
The country has absolutely the right to a final say, and the way to get that is through a people's vote.
But Vince Cable, there's no sign at all that Theresa May is listening to your request.
It will come to the point that Parliament instructs her. It may come to that. So she doesn't need to change her mind. But I think the overwhelming weight in Parliament is that a deal is no good. It will be voted down.
If you think about the future of the country, because people may be bored with the subject, is not the basis upon which we should take a decision like that.
Parliament right now is made up of many different flocks. They can move fast, support can shift in moments, but loyalty to Downing Street is in very short supply. Laura Kutzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake is in Westminster. Jonathan, just how much of an uphill struggle is it going to be for the Prime Minister?
Undoubtedly, it's a huge task, and you can see that in evidence this evening here in the Houses of Parliament. Just one floor up in one of the committee rooms, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, in effect Theresa May's deputy, David Lidington, is briefing Labour MPs to try to get them on side, because if she does have a hope of getting her Brexit deal passed in Parliament, then some Labour MPs will have to vote for it, and Number 10 is clearly making an effort to bring some of them on side and demonstrate why, in their opinion, they should indeed do that. I have to say the turnout has not been particularly good so far. Maybe they were all exhausted from that marathon session in the House of Commons earlier on, where Theresa May made her statement and then faced question after question from the opposition benches, but also from MPs from her own party about her Brexit deal. And MP after MP was, it has to be said, hostile to it, pointing out the problems as they see it. But there were some supportive voices for the Prime Minister in amongst that. But definitely we now have a period of just over a fortnight where the Prime Minister will be crisscrossing the country, really, taking her message and trying to sell her deal to business leaders and to voters in the hope that MPs will have a change of heart, those who are against the deal, and vote for it in the end. We know now the vote will be on Tuesday, the 11th of December. It's a difficult task, and it may just have got this evening a little bit more difficult for Theresa May, because Donald Trump has been speaking to reporters outside the White House, giving his latest thoughts on Brexit, saying that the deal looks like a good deal for the EU, and also that it may make it more difficult for the US to trade with the UK.
More cold water being poured on it. Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan Blake at Westminster. British summers are likely to get hotter and drier over the next 50 years because of the effects of climate change. That's according to the latest projections from the Met Office, which says without action to cut greenhouse gases, summers could be more than 5 degrees Celsius hotter than current levels by 2070, in the most extreme scenario, that is. And there are stark warnings about sea levels, which could rise by around a metre, affecting cities like London, Cardiff and Edinburgh. Here's our science editor, David Chupman.
Global warming threatens different countries in different ways, and scientists have spent the last few years trying to work out what it means for us. Wild weather is nothing new for Britain, but this latest research says more extremes are likely as the climate changes. The study says floods are set to become more frequent as the level of the sea rises and storms deliver more rain. And there's a worrying conclusion.
We have a key role in defending communities, but we know we can't protect people from every flood event, and therefore we're going to need to make hard choices about where we live in the future, where we work.
As temperatures are set to rise, the scientists have produced different scenarios for the future climate. These are based on computer simulations of how things may unfold. What this report shows is that climate change will affect everyone wherever they live. So for people on the coast, the level of the sea could go up by more than a metre. That's probably manageable for London, protected by the Thames Barrier, but very threatening for many other communities. Summer temperatures could go up by more than 5 degrees. Think of the implications for heat waves and the need for air conditioning. And the chances of a summer like the one we just had earlier this year could go up to 50% by 2050. Now, if these projections are right, what else could change by the end of the century? In a worst-case scenario, England could see summer rainfall drop by 35%. The same could happen in Wales. In winter in Scotland, rain and snow could increase by a fifth, as in Northern Ireland. But some scientists say climate change poses real dangers, but we can't yet forecast them in such detail.
The knowledge of climate change comes from really basic science, and the UK climate projections are really at the edge of new research, and they shouldn't be taken with the same confidence that we have that climate change is a threat.
Predicting exactly when and where extreme heat will strike in future is clearly a challenge, and scientists are working on that. But there is a consensus about the trends, that we are heading for a warmer world. David Shuckman, BBC News.
We can speak now to Dr. Phil Williamson from the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of East Anglia. He joins us from our studio in Norwich. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Williamson, this evening. What particularly strikes you about this report that you didn't know before?
Well, there's nothing really dramatically new about it. It gives extra detail, it gives variation between different regions, and it gives, it brings home what the effects might be if things go badly wrong. But these are the conditions that we want to avoid, and so that hopefully we might not get there.
Yes. What is the most likely scenario then, if not the worst one?
Well, that really does depend on what different countries do, what the UK does, what other countries, what America does in the next 5 or 10 years, if we really make the push. And we've reduced the emissions in the UK of carbon dioxide and other gases by about 40% over the last 30 years. Now, we've got to do the same again and a bit more, reducing them by 60% over the next 30 years, to actually have no emissions of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases at all. We've just got to have net zero emissions.
How likely is it that we're going to achieve that then?
Well, it's going to be difficult. It's not impossible, but it's going to be difficult.
As an individual, though, listening to a report like this, you can feel pretty hopeless, aren't you? If the governments of the world can't get it sorted, what can we do as individuals?
Well, and the governments have actually agreed to do something about it, and they're sort of pointing in the right direction, but they need the support of the populations and the voters as well to say, well, actually the switch to renewable energy, the switch to electric cars, if governments can help, if they can make it easier, then we can all achieve it. It could still be done.
Does that involve us then insisting that it's higher up the political agenda, higher up the news agenda even?
Well, and it's going to be difficult because there are a lot of things that are high up the political agenda at present, but this is one of the ones that we've just got to keep pushing at. But for Michael Gove this morning, he did make all the right noise, he did say all the right things. We've just got to get on and do it.
How much of a change in lifestyle are we in the developed world going to have to accept?
Well, I think that the answer is not to keep on wanting more and more, to do things more efficiently, to accept that there's got to be some changes, but really some of the big changes can be made by government policy elsewhere in the world as well. But we've just got to be aware of it and keep going, because it's not we've achieved quite a bit, but it's still a lot more to do.
What's the biggest change that governments could make?
The biggest change, I guess, is to really, it's not going to be politically easy, but to say, well, goodbye fracking, good fossil fuels. We've decided that we're not going to have coal-powered power stations anymore, but we've just the choice that we've got to start thinking about taking carbon dioxide and other gases out of the atmosphere rather than putting it in.
Dr. Phil Williamson from the University of East Anglia, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News, the headlines. NASA's InSight spacecraft lands on Mars, the first of its kind designed to study the internal structure of the planet. British summers could be 5 degrees hotter by 2070 if greenhouse gas emissions aren't cut, according to new Met Office projections. After getting her deal signed off by the EU's 27 member states yesterday, Theresa May is in the Commons to persuade MPs to back it. Sport now for the BBC Sports Centre with Azzy. Hello.
Hi Martine, thank you. There's one game in the Premier League tonight, but the match between Burnley and Newcastle has been delayed because of a medical emergency in the players' tunnel. Well, the players have been out warming up and reports suggest that the referee's assessor collapsed in the tunnel and has been taken to hospital but is conscious. Burnley tweeted to say neither the team's players or staff are affected. Kick-off has been pushed back by half an hour to 8:30. And it's a big match for both sides. They're both just 1 point above the bottom three. Joe Root has praised a complete squad effort after England completed the series whitewash of Sri Lanka. It's only the third time in history that England have won all the matches in an away test series, as Andy Swiss reports.
It's all over. The perfect ending to what on paper's been a perfect series, but how England had to work for it. Sri Lanka's target of 327 had looked impossible, but no one appeared to have told Kusal Mendis. Suddenly the hosts had hope, but just when England needed something special, they found it.
Direct hits, that might be what get England going.
Jack Leach with the flash of brilliance, Mendis gone for 86, along seemingly with Sri Lanka's chances, as England's spinners once again turned things their way. Soon they needed just one more wicket, with the hosts still needing more than 100, surely all over. Not quite, as Sri Lanka's final pair blazed away. But amid the rising tension, Leach held his nerve.
Again, what do they think this time? Gone!
Replays confirmed it was hitting the stumps, and at last England could celebrate. Their first series whitewash in Sri Lanka. It was some fight, but some feat. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
And this is how England celebrated that historic series. Back in the changing room, there's Captain Joe Root there on the guitar, although I'm not sure he's playing much, and everyone else just singing along. Great stuff. Ireland coach Joe Schmidt will step down after next year's World Cup and he'll be replaced by Andy Farrell. Farrell's been Ireland's defence coach under Schmidt after holding the same position with England up until the 2015 World Cup. It'll be his first head coach role and he'll have big boots to fill. Schmidt guided Ireland to their third Six Nations Grand Slam and to second in the world rankings.
He brings belief to players, he brings confidence, he brings ability, and I think that Joe's legacy in Ireland will obviously be the trophies he's won with Leinster, with Ireland, but probably more so it'll be potentially the coaches that he brings through. You know, when you look at what he's done, you'd like to think in the next number of years there's going to be some coaches that have worked under Joe Schmidt as players that'll come through and bring that attention to detail, and ultimately the goal is to try to get as many homegrown coaches as we can within the provinces, the national team and the whole setup.
Formula 3 driver Sophia Flörsch says she's happy to be on her way home after the high-speed crash that left her with a fractured spine. Flörsch crashed at around 170 miles an hour at the Macau Grand Prix 8 days ago and needed an 11-hour operation to repair her spine.
It was my first ever big crash, and it took me some while to get over it, but I'm over it now, and I think now a new chapter starts. And yeah, as I said, it was a bad crash, but Dallara built a really very good, stable chassis, and I'm still here walking, everything is good, and I'll be back racing and chasing my dream.
And that's all the sport for now. Thanks, Martine.
Azzy, thank you very much. The United States has described Russia's seizure of 3 Ukrainian Navy ships as an outrageous violation of sovereign territory. The ships were sailing off the coast of Crimea, Ukrainian territory which was annexed by Moscow 4 years ago. Russia insists the boats had entered its waters illegally. The Ukraine parliament is considering a proposal to declare martial law. President Trump said he didn't like what was happening in the region. In our Oxford studio is James Sherr, Associate Fellow at the International Foreign Affairs think tank Chatham House and a former head of their Russia and Eurasia programme. James, thank you very much. What does Russia gain by doing this when we've seen already international condemnation?
Russia expects international condemnation. Their view is that We are treating them as an adversary. They are determined to be very bloody-minded in defense of their interests as they define them, and they really don't care what we think about it. But the bigger picture is really that there are three factors in play here, all very serious. Apart from the fact that Russia is de facto at war with Ukraine, it is waging economic warfare in Ukraine, and the Sea of Azov is of critical importance to Ukraine's two major ports in that region, Berdyansk and Mariupol, and so the bridge, which constrains access, and the ramping up of Russian inspections of ships, which has no legal basis going in and out of those Ukrainian ports, has really ratcheted up pressure. That's number one. Number two, anyone who's looked at the bigger picture has anticipated that there would be a number of highly asymmetrical, unpleasant Russian responses to the granting of independent canonical status to what had been the Kiev Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church. And this was done by the Constantinople Patriarchate back in October. This was a big blow to Russia. They were not expecting it. It's a very big deal for a state that defines Russian civilization as something going well beyond the borders of the Russian Federation. The Church has been a big part of it. And finally, at the time the UK is leaving the EU, there will be presidential elections in Ukraine. If Russia provokes a hard variant of martial law in Ukraine, that with any kind of suspension of democratic rights or a postponement of those elections, they are hoping that will bring people onto the street, that will be very good for President Poroshenko's key opponent, Yulia Tymoshenko, who would love to wear the mantle of being a defender of Ukrainian democracy and a peacemaker. My information is that the Ukrainian parliament has just approved martial law, but in a resolution that confirmed that the elections will take place on schedule. So far it seems that Ukraine is not rising to the bait.
What would the introduction of martial law in Ukraine do, though, to either escalate or damp down the tensions with Russia?
It's a 30-day period of martial law. I haven't seen the detail yet, but it looks as if the assurances are there that there will be no constitutional tampering. So the objective would be really to remove aside normal peacetime bureaucratic obstacles to taking preparatory military actions and increasing mobilization. That's what I suspect is going to happen. But it's just happened, so we all have to be in some suspense as to how this is going to play out. And Russia has not had its last word yet.
Just finally and very briefly, if you would, what should we make of the timing of this decision by Russia to seize these vessels when we've got this G20 summit taking place in Argentina this week?
Well, again, Russia is sending a bluff message to the world that we are important, we will not be isolated, we cannot be isolated, we cannot be ignored. You have to take our interests into account, and we don't care whether you like us or not. You have to deal with us, and on our terms.
James Sherr from Chatham House, we appreciate you taking time to talk to us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Time to look at the weather forecast with Ben.
Good evening. The quiet, chilly weather of the last few days is about to get blown away. A big change in weather type, some heavy rain, some gales to come. But with that, things will turn quite a lot milder. Now, it's all because low pressure is going to start to dominate. We've got a couple of swirls of cloud on our satellite picture, low pressure systems in the Atlantic gathering strength, and these will be heading our way over the next couple of days. But before they arrive, one last quiet night to come tonight. A few showers in eastern areas. Where we keep clear skies for any length of time, there could be a touch of frost, and particularly for East Wales, the West Midlands into the West Country, the potential for some fairly dense fog patches. But behind me, you can see the change. This is our first band of rain moving in across the southwest of England, Wales and Northern Ireland as we go through tomorrow morning. The wind strengthening as well. We could see wind gusts of 50 miles per hour or even a touch more in exposed coastal areas in the west. For the southeast of England though, East Anglia up into Lincolnshire, here we'll hold on to dry and relatively bright weather for a good part of the day. It will still be quite chilly here, but notice temperatures starting to come up in the west. It'll turn wet across the Midlands, across northwest England, Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland, and over the tops of the Pennines and the Scottish mountains, say up above 500 metres, you may well see some sleet and some snow mixing in. Now, as we go through Tuesday night, that first band of rain clears through, but look at this area of low pressure deepening. Lots of white lines, lots of isobars here on the chart. Wednesday is going to be a very windy day. Gales quite widely, could see wind gusts of 60 to 70 miles per hour in places, and these bands of rain sweeping northeastwards. Looks like parts of eastern Scotland could see the heaviest of the rain. But with wind gusts like this, there certainly is the potential for some travel disruption, perhaps even a little bit of damage. But look at the temperatures, significantly higher than they have been, up to 13, 14, 15 degrees. Although with the strong winds and the rain, it won't feel that great. And then as we get into Thursday, this little area of low pressure developing here could bring another bout of very strong winds, particularly down towards the south and the west. Some heavy rain as well. It stays unsettled as we head towards the weekend, but perhaps by this stage, not quite as windy.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Martine Croxall. The headlines. NASA's InSight spacecraft lands successfully on Mars, the first of its kind designed to study the internal structure of the planet. British summers could be 5 degrees hotter by 2070 if greenhouse gas emissions aren't cut, according to new Met Office projections. After getting her deal signed off by the EU's 27 member states yesterday, Theresa May has spoken to the House of Commons this afternoon to persuade MPs to back it. Pardoned and freed by the United Arab Emirates, the British academic Matthew Hedges, who'd been sentenced to life in prison for spying. Ukraine's parliament votes to impose martial law in several regions after Russia seized 3 of its naval vessels in a move the United States called an outrageous violation of sovereign territory. More now on Brexit, and in the last few minutes, President Trump has given his thoughts on the Brexit deal. Let's listen what he had to say.
Sounds like a great deal for the EU, and I think we have to do this. I think we have to take a look at seriously whether or not the UK is allowed to trade, because, you know, right now, if you look at the deal, they may not be able to trade with us, and that wouldn't be a good thing. I don't think they meant that. I don't think that the Prime Minister meant that, and hopefully she'll be able to do something about that. But right now, as the deal stands, they may not be able to trade with the US, and I don't think they want that at all. That would be a very big negative for the deal. We do not like what's happening either way. We don't like what's happening, and hopefully it'll get straightened out. I know Europe is not, they are not thrilled. They're working on it too. We're all working on it together.
President Trump with his views on Theresa May's Brexit deal. The British student Matthew Hedges, who just days ago was sentenced to life in prison in Dubai for spying, has been freed after a presidential pardon. The 31-year-old is expected to fly home tonight after being held in jail for the last 6 months. United Arab Emirates officials still claim Mr. Hedges was a British agent, but his wife, who's led the campaign for his release, insists he's not a spy. Paul Adams reports.
Matthew Hedges' 6-month ordeal is almost over. 5 days after being handed a life sentence, he's preparing to come home.
Mr. Hedges will be permitted to leave the country once all the formalities are complete.
The hoped-for announcement came this morning, but with it a sting in the tail. The authorities in the United Arab Emirates still accuse Matthew Hedges of spying.
He was part-time PhD researcher, part-time businessman, but he was 100% a full-time Secret Service operative.
Matthew Hedges knows the UAE well. He worked there for several years before starting his PhD on aspects of the country's security policy. Sensitive subjects, but, says the government here, perfectly legitimate.
We've made it very clear for a number of months now that we see no basis in these allegations. They've reflected on that. They've taken the action that they can, which means that Matthew Hedges is going to be reunited with his family.
The UAE remains convinced that Matthew Hedges was indeed a spy. He was certainly researching some sensitive areas, including the country's military capabilities and its role in the war in Yemen. But what he and most academics would regard as perfectly legitimate, the UAE clearly saw as suspect. Matthew Hedges' wife has campaigned for months to secure his release, maintaining his complete innocence throughout.
In my heart, I know what Matt is. He's a PhD researcher. His colleagues know it, and his family know it, and hundreds of academics around the world know it, and that's all that matters. I mean, the most important thing really is that now we'll have him back home safely, and he'll be able to finish his thesis.
Matthew Hedges will be on his way home in the coming hours. His family says the ordeal has taken its toll. His life and career put on hold 6 months ago, about to resume. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Hundreds of people have attended a candlelit vigil for a teenager from Coventry who was stabbed to death on Saturday night. 16-year-old Jaden James, known as JJ, died from his injuries in hospital. Police say this year alone there have been more than 280 incidents of knife crime in Coventry. From there, Seema Kotecha reports.
Jaden James had just turned 16, described by his family as sweet, caring, funny. Last night, a candlelit vigil to remember him. His family say they're heartbroken after Jaden, known as JJ, was stabbed to death in Coventry.
He had the biggest heart. He was shy, he'd never take any photos, he'd always have his hand over his face. He'd never do anything to harm anybody. I don't even know what to say. I don't believe that he's gone, but...
The attack happened on Saturday night while Jaden was out with friends. His grandfather says the teenager had gone out to get some food.